This is Mental Health Week, and we actually had a resource that was going to join us, but because there's so many promotions for Mental Health Week, they've actually deferred to joining on our session today, but are going to come back around on June 3rd, and instead they provided this great material. And so we wanted to go through this quickly before we dig into our other topics today. And I think Photios has offered to step in and to present some of this materials in Hassani's place.
Great. Hi, everyone. And sorry again for Hassani not being there, but I'll quickly just go over and won't spend that much time because this was really Hassani that was going to talk about it. And we'll have, we do have an expert from the Canadian Mental Health Association that will be joining us at a future webinar. It's just that this week didn't work for them. But we do have some material to help you and help your clients. Oftentimes, we often talk about your clients, but the reality is that you and your families are also experiencing the same thing that your clients are. So hard to be, helping clients when you don't help yourself first. It's kind of the airplane thing. You got to, give the oxygen to yourself first before you help anybody else. So it is a time to kind of really take care of your own needs as well as helping your clients. So these are some tools and some sites that we can send to you after, and will help you in that regard. So feel free to use these resources and send them to your clients.
Yeah, so the theme of this year's mental health awareness is about getting real. And they're saying that oftentimes Canadians, as we are, we're asked how everything's going, and we always say we're fine. But we don't really mean it. We're not really saying what's going on, especially with the current stresses of working from home. So, we're fine, but we're worried about our family's health and what's going on with work and not really being able to cope, and you need someone to talk to. Or, the word fine, what it really does is keeps us at arm's length from real social connections. So again, we're fine, thanks for asking, but the truth is I've been up all night with 2 little kids and I'm running on coffee and I feel like I've been run over by a truck. I'm so tired. And this is what everyone's dealing with right now. And often a lot of your clients are going through this, which is really just going through the motions. So I'm fine. But what we're looking for is a social connection so that we can really feel like we can conquer anything that's going on. So also some of the materials which we are sending to you is about social connection and its importance for mental health. So connecting with other people in our communities is really good to help us keep us going. And, there's a lot of occurrence of mental illness and mental health issues with all Canadians. So each year, 1 in 5 Canadians experience some sort of issue. But social connections and social support are the factors that are counter for that and really protect and promote good mental health. And unfortunately, this COVID that we're going through is actually an epidemic of loneliness. So people with weak or fewer social connections are at increased risk for anxiety, depression, antisocial behavior, and suicidal behaviors. And lack of strong relationships affects the risk of mortality, comparable up to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So it really is quite important to think about ways that we can overcome this, which was the genesis for the Prevail initiative. And so being in this together, the Canadian Mental Health Association is reminding us that this is about physical distancing, not social distancing. So we are learning that we don't have to be close in order to feel close. And that your community is really about your neighbors, your friends, your coworkers, your family. So there's lots of people that you can lean on, not just your spouse. And it's really about providing the emotional support at the best of times. So what we have done for this week is on Sunday, Jalen loaded some content that is actually quite interesting. So I'd encourage you to take a look at it. We have the social distancing survival guide. There's a lot of material there for how to help young families, so screens in your child, and it's more than just putting an iPad to entertain them through the long days. There's an article about being more than simply fine. There's a check-in, a checklist to check in on your mental health. and also ways that you can care for children in the COVID crisis. So I think these would be quite useful to have a dialogue around. And as well, for every advisor that signs up for the webinar, we will be making a donation, but we encourage others to help us help others and to also donate to the Canadian Mental Health Association. And now I'm going to turn it over to Talon and Brian. So we have some updates on the Prevail platform. So Talon has added the Investor DNA, the advisor report. We're going to answer some of the questions that have already been asked, but maybe as we look through the materials, there'll be more questions. And he's going to give some information about some tutorial videos.
All right. Hi, everyone. Let me share my screen. Okay. So basically, we've been hard at work with the product team, providing a lot of updates to the platform over the last few weeks. We've been listening to your feedback as well, so you will see a lot of your feedback points and requests show up on the dashboard and in the functionality soon as well. One thing that's coming within this week is an update to the dashboard, where in the Investor DNA module here, you will be able to see a breakdown of different survey results based on your client groups. So you will be able to see a breakdown of who's a strategizer versus, you know, what percentage of your clientele is in which category, how many surveys you've sent out, how many have been filled out. So all this information will be available here. And this is coming within the next 2 days. Another thing that we partially deployed now is if you go to your clients list, you can now see a more informational view that's more fitting for the Prevail dashboard mode. So you can see your clients, of course, but you can also see the last interaction time, when they last logged in, and when you last interacted with them, as well as some basic details. But we also have a column for the Investor DNA Plus information, so you can send surveys from here. And again, within this week, we're also going to add an option to filter by whether I've sent an Investor DNA or not. So I can see who I have sent it to, who filled it out, and who I haven't sent a survey to. So you can filter this list based on that information. Now, the big change this week was the advisor overview report for Investor DNA Plus. So to see that, of course, you can drill down into any client who has already filled it out, which you can see here. So I can go in here, see some basic details, of course, about the client, and then I can jump into the full report. Another thing that we will make available within next week is the downloadable report here. A PDF version of this report will be downloadable with a link. But for now, you can go into the full report mode, and from advisor point of view, now you have a more advanced report that has more information, such as the points to discuss and successful communication tips, as well as the advisor report tab. And to talk about those and more, Brian is going to jump on and talk about the details.
Well, thank you, Talon. Really appreciate that. And good morning, everyone, or good afternoon now, I believe it's. Thanks again for having me today. And, really the goal with the advisor report, I know it look like I remember a lot of the faces from last conversation, so I won't bore you with a lot of the initial stuff, but, just to kind of give you a little bit of a background on the actual reporting itself. So we have both the client report and the advisor report. And the goal was in building this out, and after the feedback that we had run in our initial rounds early on, was that, majority of tools that exist out there today, the client takes an assessment or fills something out, and the advisor controls all the information, right? Whether that's planning modules or things like that. And that's kind of been the norm for several decades. That said, our goal was to change. And really, as we look to transform and going from a client-advisor relationship to a partnership, is really having them both on the same page so that they can work collaboratively, so that they're working really from the same sheet. And it isn't this parent-child relationship, but more of an adult-adult relationship. So with that, both the client and the advisor see see the exact same report. So that goes through the breakdown of their personality, biases, behaviors, and blind spots. Now, one of the tools that we've added in there in the advisor report was just to basically provide an overlay that helps to create a communication guide or a fact finder, if you will, to help the advisor in when they're working with the client, as far as kind of providing some tools, some conversation dialogue and topics to talk about. So that way it kind of helps them to just kind of make it a little bit easier of a normal conversation versus, all right, so we've got this, now what do I do with that? So Sarah, do you have my slide on there, or we can jump to that real quick? Oh, sorry. I should have probably just kept it and then done share screen, my bad. There we go. So again, as we go through it, first thing we start with is understanding the behavioral personas that we've created. And the reason that we created these personas is, each of us is different. And currently how we look at things, whether it's in marketing, conversation, or things like that, is we tend to box people based on demographics, right? Certain age range, certain, demographic. We're bald with a beard. I see there's a few of us, so that's a whole nother demographic in itself, but that said is really, we approach this in a different light. We look at it from a psychometric profile. And here what we're looking at is the psychology behind it. So we've created 8 different personas. If we can click. And, the goal behind that is just to help to create a communication guide. And Sarah can share this with you afterwards just to kind of give you insight, but each of us is different, right? So myself, I'm an explorer. I'm also a driver times 10. If someone comes in, and I've worked with advisors in the past that love spreadsheets or love Excel charts. My partner, Prasad, that you guys heard from last time, he could spend probably about 12 hours on an Excel spreadsheet, and he actually is smiling the entire time. Myself, after about 5 minutes, I'm pulling what little hair I have left, and I'm done. So for Prasad to communicate with me and sit down and show me a bunch of spreadsheets, he's got my attention for around 30 seconds, and then I've checked out. And so really trying to understand from a psychometric approach, how do we best communicate with that individual? So that's the first step we look at. The second is we also understand, based on their behavioral traits, we want to approach them in a way that's conducive for them. For example, if I have someone with high overconfidence, low financial mastery, and high anchoring, right? So I'm very confident that I know what I'm doing. I'm using some past anchoring. Maybe it's something from 2007, 2008, or it could have been from 2000, but I have very little financial mastery. So if you come in and try and teach me, what's going to happen? Right? It's going to be wall up, I know everything, and I'm done. So instead, it's really looking at, how do I approach that individual? And so utilizing their behavioral traits to create a more engaging conversation. And so we've created this guide here that just kind of helps on how you go about approaching that, whether it's to illustrate and educate, whether it's to challenge them and push a little bit, how you look at loss framing or gain framing, depending on their loss aversion and their risk tolerance. And it just kind of helps to provide a little bit of an insight in approaching them. And next. So from there, there we go. Oh, look at that. Done up really nice in there. So again, kind of a recap of what we talked about last time. Our initial goal is really to create awareness. And so in that conversation, if I sit down with a client, very first thing I start with, so, what did you find, what did you learn from the report? What did you find valuable? What didn't you like? And really just, get them through an open-ended question series to, share a little bit more about their experience. What are some things that they've learned about themselves? Do they agree with or do they disagree? A lot of times getting the disagreement is just as important. So Frank, back to yours, my question, and again, I'm thinking more of this, is, was she seeing this as a boss sending an assessment to her and something she was being graded on? Or was she seeing this as, taking an assessment to understand herself, and again, not being there or not understand what's going on in her head, but, there's different ways in how we see things. And there's facts, reality, and perception controls and drives a lot of what we do. And so really trying to understand that perception from the client standpoint. And that's always the first goal, is to really meet them where they are, understand the behavioral levers, and then nudge them along so that we're able to go where we are. So again, first thing around the awareness is just take the time and, the way we've designed the advisor report is you can actually put it up on a screen and share that with them. So, you know, there's nothing in there that's confidential, proprietary, or that's going to get you in a way and says, you know what, don't deal with this client or watch out for this, they've got this trouble. We've really kept it client friendly as well too. So it not only provides a guide for you, but it is something that you can actually put up on the screen and work through together. But again, it's about creating that initial engagement point, using natural language, using the different behavioral traits that we brought up in here, having a conversation to just understand, you know, some of our advisors like to start with the big overall, what did you think? Some like to go through and really start with the initial and go, you know, start with your biases. So, you know, share with me a little bit about what you learned about overconfidence. Do you feel this is you? Why do you not feel it's you? Using examples, sharing stories or cases. You know, can you tell me about a time when this may have happened or that may have happened and how you dealt with it or where you feel? And so it's really getting them to open up on those different traits. Then from there is providing an analysis. Now, here's the key with this that I want to go over is, again, as I mentioned earlier, behaviors are not positive or negative. And so many times we talk about them in that respect. And we really want to remove that. So it's one of the things I used to use in my practice because, you know, dealing with clients, it was one of those things they were embarrassed to share their financial stories, right? They would rather sometimes, I think especially here in the States, we'd rather talk about sex than we would about our financial matters. For some reason, they're more taboo. So it's creating a safe, you know, engaging space where it's, again, there's no right or wrong, there's no judgment, but it's really helping to understand the behavioral levers that move you in your decision-making process. So, you know, it's getting them to open up and looking at it from that standpoint. So if they have high overconfidence, that's not a bad thing, but, you know, let's look at how overconfidence may impact your financial decision-making process. Can you share with me where it's helped? Could you share with me a time when maybe it hasn't helped or maybe it cost you a little bit? So it's, again, creating the different points. And then from there is, now that we're bringing it again from that unconscious into the conscious realm, they're aware of it. How can we use that and create the right action? So in other words, when making these decisions, right? And we talk a lot about what's going on with the market right now. You know, a lot of us are doing the sit tight and let's wait it out because we don't have enough information. So while we're doing that, you know, how do we create those 2 to 3 strategies so that no matter how we come out of this, we actually have a plan of attack so we're ready to go. So, you know, again, kind of going back to the initial point, getting them to open up. Then from there is really looking at things not from a good or bad, but how it impacts their decision making. And then in there, one of the things that I like to do personally is review their goals, right? So understanding where they are, what their goals and objectives are, and then how can each of these behavioral traits impact both positive and negative on their goal planning. And so it's kind of looking at it that way. So if we look at the advisor report, one of the things that we go through is things to think about when making financial decisions. It allows you a series of questions that you can ask those and just get them to think about, well, this is how it may impact me, this is how it may help or how it may hinder, and kind of move from there. And so next slide, please. So, you know, and again, you know, going back to the reframing is getting this around, you know, and I know I mentioned this last time, so forgive me for this, but, you know, during this time when we're kind of in that inaction is getting this, it's not about let's look at your goals, your values and that, but let's actually take the time to understand the behavioral levers that move your everyday decision-making. So it's taking that time, it's meeting them where they are. And the big thing again, and I know I keep talking this like, you know, beating a dead horse, but being collaborative, right? It's that partnership. It's not being prescriptive. In other words, here's what you should do or what you shouldn't do, but it's working together with them. And a lot of times I have a process. If I want to get a client to do something, I can tell them what to do. Human nature takes over after around the age of 2 and we go, who the hell are you to tell me what to do? Or I can ask a series of questions to get them to share with me, here's what I think I should do. So again, here's where we are, understanding that you have high overconfidence and high anchoring, but your goal is this, let's take a look at, so what do you think, how do you think this could help you in achieving that goal? Next, what are some things to think about instead of how do you think this could hurt you? What are some things to think about because of these 2 behavioral traits that could impact your decision-making there or in achieving this goal, and really working from there. And again, you know, we talk a lot about using common language. The assessment in the report that we broke down is we don't want to use a lot of technical terms. You know, we don't want to speak up here. We don't want to make it sound like, you know, we're extremely knowledgeable in the behavioral science space. We want to bring it down and keep it into everyday conversation. So the terms like overconfidence and anchoring, these are everyday terms that can be used. And also when going back is keep referring back to those terms and focusing on that. Next slide, please. You know, again, so it's again about getting their clients to understand themselves. And, you know, again, back to this, behaviorals are not good or bad. and just focusing on that client. So, you know, with it, that's really the objective of the actual report itself. Our goal is, you know, not to, how do I say this? Not to make this as a report of here's your problem or here's what we should do. But again, it's to provide a guide, a conversation or discovery guide on that as far as what are the best practices. So, sir, if you could take me back to Taylor's slide real quick, and then Taylor, if we could, I just want to show the matrix real quick, if that's possible. All right, perfect. So now if we go through each of the matrix, so we have the bias matrix, the behavior, and the blind spot. And here what we've done to keep it really simple is, you know, again, it's one of those things. So if we're looking at overconfidence or anchoring or things like that, what we're looking at here is what is good or bad when making financial decisions, or what are some, you know, it's not so much, I say good or bad, and I don't want to say not to say that, but it's really here are the things that could adversely, you know, impact you. In other words, for example, if we look here on the bottom left is low. So in the green is if we have low overconfidence and low anchoring, that's the ideal place to be. All right. However, you know, if we have moderate overconfidence where a lot of us tend to fall, you know, that's okay as well. But it can now start to become a little bit of a gray area if we start to have high anchoring. In other words, you know, I'm pretty confident in my decision making, but I keep using that 2008, 2009 market crash is my reference point and everything and driving back to that. And I think that's what's going to happen. Now's a good time to get out, and so on and so forth. And so this really provides a guide to really kind of look at, you know, where they are within the spectrum. And it just helps you to guide as far as where you want to take that conversation with them and get them thinking a little bit different around there. So again, things to think about when making financial decisions, and then the points to discuss just helps to provide a reference grade, a guide to help frame that within the matrices there. Questions about the advisor report or the matrix itself?
I guess the first thing that comes into my mind is first got to get people to complete the survey. And then us advisors are going to have to develop the skills to be able to dialogue around the outcomes of those surveys. So, you know, getting it completed is probably the first challenge. And so I'm kind of curious about what kind of dialogue you use to introduce the whole thing. Because maybe the way I'm introducing it is not compelling enough to get people to want to do it.
Okay. So David, you know, if I may ask, how are you presenting it to them?
So when I have the client meeting, usually you have an agenda in mind. And, you know, first you're going to take their pulse, see how they're doing, you know, see if they're facing any personal issues at home. Then you're going to kind of, in my case, I'm gingerly crossing over into the subject of, are you comfortable with your money situation right now? Do you have enough cash flow? Are you worried about the short term? Is there, you know, anything we need to do there? Are you confident with the way we're set up? And then we might say, are you compromised about the long term? So, you know, we start looking and saying, do you still have goals and objectives? Are you still looking out into your future? You know, and so in that conversation, I might uncover some sore spots that need to be addressed. But ultimately, at the end, I'm going to be coming back to this and saying, look, there's something new that I've come across that might help both of us to understand you better and learn more about your inclinations as an investor, and for not just for investing, but just in your approach to decision making in general. Would you mind taking a few minutes to kind of go through this assessment and help me to understand you better? And I'll circle back with you when you've got it completed, and we can talk about it.
Okay. And what are you finding the answers? I mean, what's the replies or responses that you're receiving?
Well, I've sent about a dozen invitations for people to register and take the survey. 2 of them registered, and the invites went to everybody for both registering and surveys. And I haven't seen any completed surveys yet. Okay.
So, I mean, you know, I didn't perhaps see anything there that was like glaring or things that I would change. You know, one thing I will share that, you know, that we're finding success in, and, you know, I have, you know, access to look at kind of, you know, our entire global, where we're at and who's completed or who hasn't. And from an advisor standpoint, we're over a 98% completion rate. And so, you know, that's the one thing I only have 2 assessments right now that were started that weren't finished. So that's, I mean, if we look at things, that's been a pretty good answer, you know, as far as how we're able to get through. And it's, a lot of it is around the framing and how we position it, right? And I think one of the things that we have to look at is, first is, what's my relationship with the client, right? You know, because, you know, if I've got a warm relationship with a client, I can say, hey, David, just take this assessment, right? If I have more of a cool, or, you know, it could be a tumultuous relationship or tenuous, you know, then in that case, then it's really how I position is going to be really key. So one of the first things that, you know, I like to start with, and we teach part of our best practices, is that, again, you know, right now, markets are where they are. You know, one of the things that, you know, I find really helps me to better understand, you know, how I can work with an individual or work with a client is to understand where they're coming from, right? And so it's really about starting with that. So David, you know, what I have is it's a wonderful tool that looks at how you think behaviorally when making financial decisions. And, you know, it takes about 8 to 10 minutes to complete. You know, it's not, there's nothing where there's a right or wrong. There's nothing in there that's private or anything, but it really looks at what goes on inside when you're making big decisions or financial decisions. So I'd love to have you complete it. You'll get a report that'll actually go over the different behavioral traits and how they, you know, basically play into your decision making. I'll also receive a report. I'd love to schedule a time where we can sit down and go over that together. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, clients would say, sure, send it to me. And, you know, so now do they take the action?
Yeah, and that also, that could be, you know, and that's why if you know, is that nudge. Sometimes, you know, and again, we all have a lot of things going on. I mean, I use the dental appointment excuse all the time. Like, I make the appointment with my dentist, and then the dentist has to send me 5 reminders just to make sure I show up, right? The same thing with my doctor as well, even though I'm the one making the appointment. And that's the thing, we've gotten so busy, and this darn thing, unfortunately, is, you know, taking up so much of our lives that, you know, it's sometimes it's one of those things that it's fallen out of perspective. And that, so what I look at is this, is if I have that conversation with it like that, position that, and really, before we even dive into anything financial, really, let's take a look at, again, the behavioral levers that impact your decision-making process. And it just kind of helps you to get a better understanding of how you think when making decisions. It'll also help me in how we can work better together and collaborate when we create the 2 to 3 strategies and revisit everything. So that said, you know, again, and then I just repeat, you know, what we talked about. And then after that, if I see that they haven't taken it, I love it. I usually give them a couple days, 2 to 3 days. You know, if I see they haven't, and I do a quick reach out. I'm a personal, like, I like to pick up the phone versus emails, and I hate email and text. My partner and I have a rule that, you know, nothing other than, are you on your way, for email and text. Otherwise, because depending on the mood that you're in, you read it with that tone, you know. So Fodios could send me something, what's going on, and he's meaning it in a loving way. And I could look at, I'm having a bad day. I'm like, what the hell is he saying? What's going on? Is he mad at me? You know, so it's one of those things. I pick up the phone whenever possible and reach out and just, David, you know, I just wanted to follow up to see how you're doing. You know, I had sent you the assessment. Did you have any issues reaching it? Did you have any questions about it? And just start there, right? Not, hey, why didn't you take the damn thing? You know, and so kind of start there. And sometimes it may be, you know what, I'm busy, this happened, that happened. Sometimes it could be, you know what, I'm a little nervous. And, you know, sometimes it's one of those things where clients are afraid that, oh, I'm giving more information to you. That could be that. So it's, again, there's no personal information that's on here. This is not something that it's not a right or wrong, but it just looks at the behavioral levels, and it's reassuring them. And it's just really going back. And I'm very big about repetition, as you guys have probably seen right now. You've heard me repeat something a dozen times.
Brian, Hassani here. Just wanted to interject as well in terms of some of the success that I've been seeing in terms of something I use is saying, listen, we're in a time of self-reflection, and David and other advisors online with your clients, we're in a time of self-reflection, and you know, I really think it's a good time for us to reanalyze your risk. You know, where things are right now, markets are almost back to even keel. I think it's time for us to, traditionally we meet once or twice a year, but I want our relationship to be more high touch, and for me to even understand you much more than I originally do now. As such, here is a great behavioral finance tool, which is called the Investor DNA, like finding out your true DNA, who's your true personality. And I think this will help both you, Mrs. Smith, and me, Mr. Advisor, that much more, and where we could be much more in sync. Could you take the 5 or 10 minutes over the weekend or at your pleasure to go through this? It will certainly help you, and will certainly help me to help you better on a go-forward basis.
Brian,
And I've
I
been
think
getting
what,
tremendous success.
Hassani, I think what you're suggesting, if I can just say, are there some scripts that you have given to advisors in the past to help them with in this regard, like framing it, talking about the time it takes, what it is about? Is there any kind of scripts? Because everybody here is kind of new at this on the behavioral finance side; they're not experts. So, are there a few different scripts that they could perhaps use?
Most definitely, I'd be more than happy to structure several, but I think that would be very helpful, and I'd be more than happy to do so.
I think it was like Frank was saying earlier too, you got to kind of measure your client and get a feel for, are they open to this, or are they somebody who's going to be kind of offended that you would even ask them this? Because they just get bristly about it. Like, what do you know, I hire you to make my decisions. You know, I don't know, like different people, like I'm going to deal with one this afternoon. I can't even get her to do a Zoom meeting. Okay. You know, so everybody's different. I wondered, you know, would it be helpful if I walked through the questionnaire with the client and say, look, let's do it together?
You know, it's, you know, that's one of the things that you can do. You know, I haven't seen it. You know, the key there is to, you know, remain neutral, right? And that whole thing, if they look to you for the answer, let's say, well, so David, what do you think about the steps? Or what do you think about X? You know, this isn't about me, you know, and that's the only thing, just to keep it as unbiased as possible. But, you know, I don't see any issue with that. We do have advisors that actually go through the assessment in the office with their client as well too. So that's, you know, another approach, or, you know, online with them where they go through it, you know, real quick. I'm going to send it to you if you can complete it while I'm on with you. So they've done that as well too. You know, so look, the thing is, as you brought up, David, it's really understanding your client. Who are they? You know, how best to, you know better than anyone how best to engage, or their personality style as far as how the interaction is. You know, really looking at, there's no right or wrong, but just really trying to, you know, figure out how to connect with them and make it as painless as possible. Again, this is not about a judgment. And I think that's something that really needs to be stressed. There's no right or wrong, you know, and this is not providing me more information to where I can hold over you or anything like that. It's really about helping us to get better on the same page, to be more of that, create a better, deeper partnership in that regards. And, you know, we always joke about Maslow's hierarchy of need and self-actualization. This is really, you know, heading up those steps, right? It's better understanding yourself, because these things are impacting what we do every day as is. But for most of us, they're in that unconscious realm. And so what we're doing is we're bringing these into the conscious realm. And the more that we create a greater awareness to these things, the better that we can control the different levers that move us when making these decisions. And so, but great question, great question. Other questions? Hassani, welcome aboard. Everything's
Yes,
working.
I know. But yeah, I think something else for the advisors online. This is also a great prospecting tool. It shows advisors that they are on the cutting edge of what's next. Behavioral finance is certainly going to be a much bigger part of wealth management going forward. So advisors and their clients, you know, this is saying, guys, it's true. It's you know, you're not really trying to psychoanalyze anyone, but we're in an environment, a high touch environment, that people want to and need to understand themselves better and be making better decisions, because, you know, we're in 2020, and, you know, this is a real decision-making year in terms of everything that affects our life. And again, with mental health, all of these things, you know, lots of people don't know how to make good decisions, including myself, you know. So I've been using this personally and analyzing my blind spots and being more aware. And I think that's a great way for advisors to say is, listen, I have taken this and I've seen blind spots for me personally, and I've been using it within my everyday life, and it has helped me. As I said last week, guys, I always thought I was an extrovert, but I'm not an extrovert. I'm a propeller head, and I own it. I love being a propeller head. But you know, when I'm passionate about something, I speak to it, and people would think I'm an extroverted sales guy. But it's because I love what I do and understand the product that I stand behind, and that's how we all add value, and we learn new things about ourselves every single day. And there's no better time than now to self-reflect and to take the next steps.
Sonny, you hit it right on the head too. Thank you. I mean, it's really about, starting with yourself, right? And David, have you taken the report yourself, David, for the assessment? Sorry.
Yeah, I took it back in January, February, and yeah, I like it. I think personal introspection is good. I think people should be looking at, looking deeper at who they are, because then they can reflect better on how to be better for other people. If you don't know yourself, how you're going to be any good for anybody else? So I think it's a great path to go down, but not everybody's receptive. Like a lot of people, you might catch them on a day where they've been busy. Maybe the guy just finished marking a bunch of papers he's doing a class for his students online, and nobody's really familiar with online tools for doing a class, and the guy's afraid, and he runs into his meeting with his advisor, at his house, okay? And he's kind of scrambling to get his stuff together, and he just wants to know, like, how's my money?
Yeah, exactly.
And now you're gonna kind of take him down this road of self-enlightenment. And he might not be ready for that at that time, I mean, he might be saying, that's wonderful. What's that got to do with my money? What are you doing down there, Dave? What am I paying you for anyway? Did you guys do anything with my money?
It's Dave. I think here it's twofold. It's what you're doing with my money at this point in time. But again, should markets get more volatile, and all advisors online know how clients get, how compliance gets, this is another tool for compliance. Is saying, listen, I did above and beyond to understand my client and for my client to understand themselves. So if I bought Suncor and oil goes again this month, no bid, and down $37 for storage, then the client understands the risk that I put them into that portfolio, and we both spoke about it. And he said, I'm fine. I think oil is going to go back up to $100. Well, Mrs. Client, you told me to buy Suncor. I looked at your KYC, we agreed, and I even understood you better. And he said, I can take risk. So from a lawsuit perspective, this even helps you. We're just talking holistic practice management, and practice management is something that we're going to be doing in a few seminars. But these are things where it covers your ass as well as an advisor.
Good point, Hassani. And to add real quick, David, you brought up a very key point. I do a lot of volunteer mentoring and coaching with entrepreneurs, and that have been mentored for a few different startup organizations. And in the coaching, we talk a lot about everyone. We have open-minded moments and closed-minded moments, right? So, we could say, you know what, I'm the most open-minded. I will listen to everything. But I tell you, I look at myself and I think I'm that way, but there are days when I will not hear anything. Sarah could say everything she wants to me and my mind's closed and I'm looking at it from a bad lens, right? Sorry, I'm picking on you, Sarah. But that said, that's exactly, it's also doing a pulse check, right? Checking the temperature where they're at, especially now, Sarah and Photius did a great job of explaining mental health. I mean, this is where we're at right now. And it may be in one of those phases. And if right now, look, I just moved back to Seattle after spending 10 years in New York. So it's been talk about loneliness. I have the mirrors now, the trifold mirrors in my bathroom. I actually put them behind me and I can actually have a conversation with a dozen people. That's my group. And Tuesday is my birthday. So I'm going back in there doing the same thing and having a shot. But, that's where I'm at. And I will say, I have those moments. And like Hassani, it's like, I'm that extrovert 9 to 5, and then I'm an introvert afterwards, but I'm realizing I need people. And, we're in week 9 and we're going till May 31st here in Seattle. So it's going to get a little tough. That said, same thing. Everyone's experiencing the same thing, and so it's really figuring out when the time is right. And it's just doing a temperature check first. And, I understand right now, David, you've got a lot on your plate. it's one of the things. But when you do have a moment, when you catch your breath, I'd love for you to just take the assessment real quick. Again, it takes a look, and it's just reiterating and reaffirming, and so it's just kind of looking at that side as well too. But it sounds like you're doing all the right things there on that. And again, if there's anything, please, we'll have scripts that we can send to help kind of nudge along with that as well. But a lot of times it's just catching them that open mind, closed mind, and and in planning throughout our entire life, right? There's days they want to hear about it, and other days, why didn't you tell me about it? But I have been, but you just weren't listening, and that never happens, right? So.
Yeah, I think you're up against that busy world problem, right? People are so busy, and then they have their meeting with you, they get their confidence reassured, and you can offer them a great little tool like this, and they get back to their busy life, and they say, hey, you know what? I'm good. Like that guy, I'm comfortable with what he said. Like sometimes people already know the answers and they just want to hear it from you. And then they just go back to their life and they're good again. So, trying to take them to this next level, they may not see the,
Agree, David. And Brian, we just before we transition, I think something which is very important is, again, using this as a prospecting tool as well. During times of market disconnect, there is no better time to go out to try to win new clients. And we here at Pascal, that's what we're trying to do, is to give you better tools, more arsenal to go out and grow your business, grow your practice. And, this investor DNA, for some people it might work, for some it might not, but it's another arrow in your quiver. And we can certainly show you, I'd be more than happy to show you how to fire it. I've been called Robin Hood back in my day. Right?
Add real quick.
Is there a way we can invite people to take the survey and enroll themselves on the platform to do the survey?
Yeah, we can talk about that offline. And anyone who needs my help, Sarah's help, Photos' help, all of us, we're all here, Brian. So don't be shy, and just please come forth. We'd love to help you.
And just to add real quick to what Hassani was saying on prospecting, I mean, that's one of the things that we're actually seeing a lot of success in right now, because right now everyone's scared, right? If an advisor calls me right now, what's the first thing that comes through my mind? David, you want my money, right? And it's right now that scarcity mindset, unfortunately, is looming a little high. So this is a nice, easy step. We're not even there yet, and so it's really starting with taking the step before, get to know them, understand the behavioral levers before we even decide, where that conversation goes. So it's one of those things that, and I've seen that a lot with a lot of my advisors, is that, every time they pick up the phone, well, of course, you're calling a prospect that's going to cost them. That's what's going on in their head, and so it's, how do we change that conversation? This is a nice, what I say, it's a much softer landing or an introduction to really help to build that relationship. And it creates a different conversation. I don't know how it is in Canada, but in the States, values-based goals planning, all that, the holistic thing that was 20 years ago, that was new. Today, it's become very cliche. And unfortunately, most don't do it, but everyone says it. And so this, again, is another differentiator that can help build a different relationship and, a deeper client engagement. So.
Very much agreed. And I think now, I guess, Eve or Sarah, if we could just go back and get into, in terms of some upcoming seminars, and I'll turn it over to Eve.
Thanks, Hassani. Good afternoon, everybody. Yves Rebete here. So I hope you got something of that whole engagement piece, because that's really what I think the platform, what we're trying to endeavor, is to help you in terms of client engagement. And I totally get the idea that, some clients, they feel they're already engaged because they're already your client. The issue is there an opportunity there to have a better understanding of one another that eventually leads to, hopefully, a better matching of the kind of investor profile or individual profile that Brian was speaking to, with ultimately portfolio solutions. So on the portfolio management side of things, we're going to be looking at trying to match those investor types with portfolios that, embed specific components and exposures and or strategies, or even actively managed strategies to better meet the client's personality, and it's not just about risk tolerance and return opportunities at time like these, where everybody becomes acutely aware of where their risk tolerance really was. It's kind of important to make sure that you've got the most solid and robust way of dealing with understanding the client. So as far as the engagement piece within the Prevail platform, just to give you a little bit of a preview of what we're doing over the next little while, we're going to be discussing a number of topics that we think are relevant in the current market context, in the current demographics context, if you will, which, COVID-19 has not changed some of the challenges inherent to the demographic shift that's taking place in the background. It's rendered some of the issues more acute, arguably in relation, for example, to generating income and cash flow. So I'll touch on this in a second. But importantly, ultimately within the webinar, we want to bring you some people that manage some strategies and with firms that provide some exposures that we think might be useful to you and advisable. So over the next little bit, as you can see next week, we will be talking about option strategies, so covered call strategies. As advisors, you may have applied some of these strategies in the past. I'm sure you realize that on an individual securities basis, it's very different than doing it more at an institutional level and on a portfolio at a portfolio level. So we'll have two specialists speaking to the topic of essentially what I like to call harvesting the volatility premium, if you will. You're all aware that volatility shot way past the peak volatility that we experienced in 08-09. Obviously, in the past 6 weeks, volatility levels have retreated meaningfully, thankfully, but we may not be out of the doghouse, and we may continue to see some spikes in volatility. And for that matter, I'm sure you all realize that the kind of subdued volatility environment that we sort of quote unquote enjoyed until February, that regime is probably over for the next while until we have a clearer path out of the current crisis. So we'll talk about option strategies. Those are partial option strategies in some instances, and as an active manager, you'll get to hear from them directly in terms of what that looks like, in terms of implementation, in terms of their experience in the market, and in terms of the opportunity that they can take by being focused specifically on what is happening in the option market, on the variety of portfolio and underlying exposure that they give you access with. Not to mention, obviously, that translates into generally decent yields, which in the zero interest rate environment I made reference to is a not insignificant potential contributor to generating some cash flows in your portfolio. Subsequent to this, we'll have one of our Prevail initiative partners, Starlight Capital. We'll hear from Dennis Mitchell. As you guys probably know, Starlight specializes in real estate investing and infrastructure. That's a category where most investors are underweight, and where you probably all realize institutions have for some time ventured into that specific arena, if you will. Again, it's an area that has at times different dynamics than what's happening in the equity market, although certainly recently it hasn't exactly been necessarily spared in its entirety. At every crisis, we have some instances where access to liquidity is critical and can create some problems, and it's not for no reason. I think that the Fed had to act as quickly and in as dramatic a fashion as they did when they did. But Dennis Mitchell is a great speaker. Those of you that have had the opportunity to hear from him before, and he's an expert in that category, and he'll be able to provide, I'm sure, some meaningful insights into what's happening on that front. again, in an area where you can look to generating some income for your clients, which is going to remain a big challenge. And then the week after that, we'll be spending some time looking at dividends. And unfortunately, dividends happen to be one area where a lot of investors have been venturing for some time in lieu of looking at fixed income yields that provided sufficient cash flows. And I'm not telling you anything new when you hear that dividends in the context of COVID-19, when all of a sudden you put the economy on ice, they are under the knife. Yesterday, I'm sure you heard Suncor cut their dividend in a not insignificant fashion. So Sri Iyer, one of the speakers from Guardian Capital, will be joined that day by a manager at CI Harbor by the name of Peter Hofstra. And these gentlemen focus on figuring out, what dividend stocks, where, and how to avoid the potential landmines that dividend cuts can represent. And hopefully they'll provide us with a decent amount of color around what they've seen in the current market context and what they think in terms of how to position in the weeks and months ahead, given the unfolding crisis that we're going through on the healthcare side of the equation and what that's done to the economy. So that's to give you a little bit of a preview on what's coming up in the next few weeks with the webinars related to the engagement side of things with your clients, hoping that some of the topics resonate with you. And by the way, if you have other topics in mind and or speakers that you'd like to hear from, we'll be happy to try to bring them on the platform and make them available to you and get them engaged in a discussion where, we can all hopefully benefit from some of their expertise in their specific areas of specialty. So I'll wrap it up here. That's it for me today, and look forward to speaking to all of you next week again.
Certainly. Thanks, Eve. And I guess just in addition to that, as we thank our partners, Starlight Capital, Fidelity, Morningstar, Canadian Mental Health Association. Again, this being Canadian Mental Health Week. Let's love ourselves, let's love our families, and let's love our communities. And obviously, Syntonic with our behavioral finance and advisor analysts and our other sponsors. But what's very important is that we continue to prevail through this crisis and, work hand in hand. And please, guys, reach out to Sarah and myself to help you in terms of anything to do with investor DNA, using Prevail and getting more clients interacted in your business. That's what we're here for. That's what we relish. And we certainly look forward to next steps and continuing to add value in your daily lives and your practices, and in turn for you to better help your clients.